Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be diving into Philippine law and getting into how to prove you're legally someone's child.
It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, you came to us wanting to know more about this whole idea of filiation, and you gave us a really interesting mix of legal excerpts and court case summaries to go through.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area of law because it's so personal. You know what I mean? We're talking
Yeah.
about families, inheritance, even citizenship.
Right. Really gets to the heart of who we are.
Exactly.
And you know me, I always like to start with the basics. So Article 172 of the Philippine Family Code, that's kind of like our home base here, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's our foundation.
It lays out the main ways to establish filiation, especially for kids born to married parents.
You got Article 172 gives us those clear-cut scenarios, a
Ah,
birth certificate straight from the civil register, a court judgment, or when a parent formally acknowledges their child in a signed public or private document. Those are slam dunks.
yeah, those are the easy ones.
Mm.
But life isn't always straightforward, is it?
Oh, that's true. Things can get messy.
So what happens when you don't have those documents or they're not available?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Article 172 acknowledges that families can be complicated. So even without those primary documents, the law provides other avenues to prove filiation.
Like what?
Well, one key phrase you'll encounter is open and continuous possession of the status of a legitimate child.
Okay, that sounds a little formal.
I know, right?
Break it down for me.
Basically, imagine a child who's always used their father's surname. They live in the father's house and are introduced to everyone as their kid, even without a formal document explicitly stating it. That consistent public recognition of the child as belonging to that family, it carries weight.
Hmm. So it's really about painting a picture of their life.
Exactly. It's about the reality of the relationship.
And that's something that holds true, I bet, in a lot of different places, not just the Philippines.
Absolutely. Many legal systems around the world recognize that a family bond isn't just about a piece of paper.
It's about how you live.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see why these cases are so interesting.
Yeah.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle to figure out the story of someone's life.
And to add even more intrigue, Article 172 includes this phrase, any other means allowed by the rules of court and special laws?
Okay, so we're leaving the door open to other types of evidence.
You got it.
So like what? Family photos, letters, testimonies from people who knew the family well?
Exactly. It becomes a question of what evidence is convincing enough to establish that parent-child relationship. And that's where those real-life cases you provided are super insightful because they show us how these principles actually play out in people's lives.
All right, let's get into these cases then. First up, we have GR No 118464 from 1998.
Okay.
This one seems to be a perfect example of how different types of evidence can be important.
It really highlights how the courts are looking at the whole picture. They're not just laser focused on finding a birth certificate.
Right.
In this case, a baptismal certificate became a significant piece of the puzzle.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. But it makes sense when you think about it.
Right.
Baptismal certificates often have parentage details.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that family history is often scattered across various documents and traditions.
Okay, let's move on to GR No.
Yeah.
84770. This one's from 1991 and seems to really focus on that continuous possession idea.
This one's a classic illustration of how Article 175 plays out in real life. We'll get deeper into Article 175 a little later, but essentially this case shows how the court looks at the entirety of a person's life. Their interactions with family, how they were raised to determine filiation.
It's not always about having that one document that proves everything.
That's about the whole picture.
That makes sense, especially when you think about how each family has its own unique dynamics. And that brings us to case number 3, GR No 85723 from 1995.
Okay.
This one stood out to me because it allowed a mother's testimony as evidence in a case about paternity.
That's an interesting one for sure. You see, historically, courts might not have given as much weight to a mother's testimony in these situations.
Interesting.
But this case shows a shift in legal thinking, a recognition of the mother's role in establishing paternity.
It reflects how views on family and parental roles are always changing.
Absolutely.
This makes me wonder what other unusual evidence has been used to establish filiation.
Well, there's this one case where they used a bunch of family photographs
Okay.
showing the child at family events and gatherings over many years.
Really?
And it actually played a key role in the court's decision.
So those casual photos, the ones from birthdays and holidays, they can actually hold up in court.
You'd be surprised, especially when you combine them with other evidence. They can help build a really strong narrative of that family connection. It's true what they say, A picture is worth 1,000 words.
And in this case, those pictures were worth a legally recognized family bond. It's amazing to think that there might be really important evidence just sitting in people's attics.
Oh, absolutely. These cases show us that sometimes the most powerful evidence comes from the most unexpected places. It's not always about having that birth certificate tucked away. It's about the life you live and the connections within a family.
That brings us to something we haven't talked about yet.
Oh.
Article 175 of the Family Code. This is the one that makes things a little more fair for children born outside of marriage, right, when it comes to proving who their parents are.
That's right. Article 175 is really important because it says that these children have the same options for proving filiation as other children born to married parents. It recognizes that all children, regardless of their parents' situation, deserve to be able to establish that legal connection to their parents.
Which is so important when it comes to things like inheritance, right, or support, or even citizenship.
Absolutely. Let's say someone born outside of the Philippines is trying to claim Filipino citizenship through their parent, while proving that parent-child relationship even years later can be the deciding factor.
Wow, that's huge. It makes this whole legal discussion about filiation feel very real.
It is real. We're not just talking about abstract concepts here. These are about people's lives, their identities, their futures. And it just goes to show how important it is to have a basic understanding of these laws, even if you don't think they apply to you right now.
Right. You never know.
You never know.
Knowledge is power.
That's right.
Now, we've talked about inheritance and citizenship, but what about support claims? How does proving filiation affect those situations?
Well, it's essential. Imagine a child trying to get financial support from a parent or an adult child who needs to take care of their elderly parent in these cases. Proving that legal parent-child relationship through filiation can be the key to making a successful claim.
It's amazing how this one area of law, proving who your parents are, connects to so many other parts of life.
It's all interconnected, and these cases really highlight that even with a clear framework like the family code, there's always room for interpretation because every family is different. Every case has its own unique details.
Which is what makes these real-life court rulings so interesting.
Oh, wait.
They give us a peek into how the law works in these very personal and complicated situations.
Speaking of interesting rulings, we've got a few more cases to look at.
All right, let's hear them. What's next on our legal adventure?
Okay, so this next case, GR No. 231459 from 2019. It's interesting because it's about land ownership.
Land ownership.
Okay.
How does that tie back to proving filiation?
So in this case, someone was trying to claim ownership of some land by saying they were the child of the previous owner.
Okay, yeah.
Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Right. I bet it wasn't that easy.
Not quite. They tried to use a baptismal certificate as proof, but it didn't have enough specific details to directly connect them to the landowner.
Interesting. So even with something like property, having that solid proof of filiation is key.
It's crucial. It's like the missing piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. All right, what's the next case?
Okay, this one's GR No. 1989998 from 2012, and it involves a tragic situation, the death of a hotel guest. But the reason it's relevant to our deep dive is because it really emphasizes the importance of that continuous possession idea we were talking about earlier.
So even in a case that seems completely unrelated to family matters, this concept of proving filiation is still central.
Absolutely. The court basically said that being recognized as someone's child consistently and openly, using their surname, being known as their kid, that's a valid way to prove filiation even if you don't have a birth certificate.
It really shows how interconnected the law can be.
Exactly.
Things you wouldn't expect to be related end up being related.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to go back to something I mentioned earlier about how family law changes over time. You know, we've been focusing on cases that happened after the family code was put in place in 1988.
Right.
But what do you think happens when there's a case from before 1988?
That's a good question.
Things can get really interesting because the law isn't set in stone. It changes as society changes.
So a case from, let's say, the 1970s might have a totally different set of rules about filiation.
Absolutely. It's like taking a time machine back to a time when things were viewed differently.
That's wild. It really makes you think about the complexity of a law, but also how it tries to keep up with how family life is always changing.
It's a constant evolution.
Well, this has been incredibly eye-opening. Thank you so much for walking us through all of this.
Of course. Happy to be here.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Philippine family law. We hope you learned something new and maybe even feel inspired to explore your own family's legal story. Until next time.